Okay. I'm going to call the meeting of the City of Urbana Council Committee of the Whole to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes, I'm here by Councilor.
Mr. Garrick? Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Ms. Marlin?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing? Here.
Just a couple of housekeeping things before we go on. Just a general reminder, if any members of the audience want to address the council, please fill out a yellow form in the back of the room and turn it into Ms. Clark, the city clerk. As you may have noticed, Brandon Bowersox is calling in from home, so if you hear a voice coming from on high, it's Brandon. And I'm going to try to remember to ask for his comments or input for each item, but if I don't, Brandon, just jump in. And third, if anyone's wondering why I'm chairing a committee meeting for 2 weeks in a row, it's due to the travel schedules of Alderman Charlie Smythe and David Gehrig, and weren't sure whether they'd be back in time, so in order to keep the schedule from getting too far out of whack, I'm just repeating it. More information than you probably wanted to know, but that's it. Okay. Any additions to the agenda? Okay. Staff report. Oh, Mayor.
I went to the Illinois Municipal League, and so did Mike Munson in Chicago, and they talked about a number of interesting things, including the changes to the Freedom of Information Act, which might create some problems for cities if commercial entities can ask for a huge amount of information and not have to pay for it. That was one of the major concerns. But I would encourage council members to go to these meetings because they cover a wide range of issues. And one of their publications is You've Been Elected, and it's kind of a guide to city government. So I'm going to get everybody a copy of it because I think it's very well written. And one of the issues was video gaming. And that's going to, the state is kind of confused on this. They haven't drawn up their regulations yet. And it's something, it's video poker. Something was, that was added at the last minute to the Capitol bill as a way of funding it. And the governor intervened and put in an option so that cities could opt out of it or counties could opt out of it. Thank you. And DuPage County was there. They're the first county to opt out of it. And although the panel seemed to be dominated by industry people, I thought what DuPage County had to say was very interesting. And I know that people in Champaign County are very concerned about this, and our county is going to be holding a hearing on it, I think, in November. But apparently 9 states have adopted video poker and then dropped it. And one of those states is Iowa. So I think we should look very carefully at Iowa's experience. But we will be discussing this. It's something that falls in the lap of the liquor commissioner. That's me. So I want to know all the sides of it. Did you want to say something about it, Mike?
Just that I'll be doing some research, talking to some of the local businesses that have it, and also researching on a broader basis. And I'll be sending reports to you guys on that to help you make a decision.
And I would like to talk about a couple of meetings that are coming up. 3 years ago, Urbana invited our sister city, Champaign, and the county board to a joint study session on water on the Mahomet Aquifer. And now the Mahomet Aquifer Consortium has completed a report. They've been holding meetings around the whole region, and they asked me to put together a similar meeting to what we had 3 years ago. So we're having it on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, at 7 o'clock at Parkland College, the Tony Knoll Technology Building. There'll be an hour of presentations and then an hour for questions from the audience. And the cities are co-sponsoring it, the Village of Savoy, Champaign County Board, the Regional Planning Commission, our Sustainability Advisory Commission, the Chamber of Commerce, Parkland College, the institutes at the university, including the Water Survey and the Geological Survey, the Farm Bureau, the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, Earth Partners, and Illinois American Water, and the Champaign-Urbana Public Health District. And along the same topic for water, there's going to be a hearing of the Illinois Commerce Commission on the proposed rate increases for Illinois American Water, and it's going to be held this Thursday, October 1st, at 7 o'clock in the Champaign City Council chambers.
Thank you. Did we have a staff report? No? Okay. Dennis?
I guess this would probably be the right place in the meeting to just make a comment. As you know, last weekend the Folk and Roots Festival took place in Urbana, downtown, and at various venues in the downtown area. I'm holding the program that was distributed during that time. If you attended at all, you know that it was a really well-attended event and a really big success. I myself ended up going to just about everything on the program because once I got involved in it, I just really didn't want to go home. We stayed up, and there was all kinds of events at all the different places that were in the downtown area. A lot of credit goes to the people who put this together, Robert Crum and Tom Torino and others. And I'm just saying that I thought it was an excellent event, and I really look forward to having it repeated next year.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is approval of minutes from the August 24th meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Heather Stevenson, seconded by Dennis Roberts. Any discussion, additions, corrections? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next item on the agenda is public input. I have requests for input from 3 people, and 1 person wants to address us now, and 2 other people will wait till the item comes up. So, Carol Ammons. If you can give your name and address and speak into that little black microphone on the desk there.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Carol Ammons. I'm 1108 North Busey Avenue in Urbana. I came to speak to the Citizens Police Review Board Annual Report 2009. First and foremost, I want to take this opportunity to thank those who serve on the I want to say CPRV, but I know there's another initial in there. But those who serve on the committee, on the board itself, and the work that they've been able to do to date. I did get a chance to read the annual report, and I am also appreciative of the report being put online and was able to print it off today and read it. I just wanted to draw the council's attention to a couple of things that I saw inside the report that I thought were necessary to complete the process of getting a comprehensive board. There were a couple things in here that specifically dealt with time frames and the amount of time that's necessary for a complainant to file their report, as well as for the board to reply to that report through that process. One of the questions that came up for me was when a person is filing their complaint, there's 30 calendar days in which that they can appeal that complaint, but it doesn't specify 30 working days or just 30. It says 30 calendar days there, but on other pages it says the city has 45 working days to reply. So for the citizen gets 30 days. That means Saturday and Sunday included. But for the city, they get 45 working days. I think it really should be consistent. If the citizen has 45 working days, so should the city as well, so that the person who receives this response from the city, maybe on a Friday, their time will start just as the city's time starts on the next business day. I think that should be considered in this process. There was something else that, and that's throughout the document, so that was questions where it came to 14 days for this or 30 days for that. I think it should be pretty consistent across the board to represent business days for each party. The other thing that I saw in here is the reporting schedule, which is really helpful for people who are trying to follow the process. I was just not clear as to whether the reports that would be submitted on those dates are submitted solely to the City Council and the Mayor, or are they presented in a public forum where it is, that way the public can view those things or watch them on television, and then City Council and the Mayor will have their own copies, and it will also be available online for people who want to print it out, the quarterly reports and the like. And I think that there was one other area. The forms in here I thought were very good. I thought that they were user-friendly, and of course through some testing process you'll see if that's really user-friendly or not. And then the, let me see, there was one other. The jurisdiction of the board itself, I think this is something that I wrote in my review that was sent out from the Human Relations Office, asking what happens after a person replies in an appeal process and says, I don't agree with the findings of the chief, and then they appeal to the board, and the board then do some findings themselves and make recommendations to the mayor. It doesn't clearly clarify what happens at that point. It kind of stops at recommendations go to the mayor, and I wasn't able to really deduce what happens from that point, or what should the person do next if they followed all the other parts of the process, and then the CPRB goes and gives their recommendations to the mayor's office, then what happens? That's the only other thing that I saw that I was not clear about in the process. I thank you all for your attention. I thank those who serve, and I'll continue to watch and participate as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Ammons? No. Thank you. Well, next on the agenda is the Civilian Police Review Board Annual Report.
Good evening. I've asked Tom Costello, who's the chairman of the committee, and Grace Mitchell, who is the vice chair, to present the report to the council and to respond to any initial questions that you may have.
Well, good evening, and we're happy to be here and happy to make our report to you. We have been, I think, if nothing, studious in our attempts to get things moving in the direction that we'd like to have them move. The report pretty much stands for itself, and primarily what we've done is really put together all the mechanisms that we need in order to perform our duties when we're called upon. I would bring to your attention, however, two things, and I think that the one is page 13, where we offer you the reporting schedule so that you can see that we will be consistently monitoring our progress. In addition to that, I think that you have probably been made aware of that in the last year we had 8 complaints, 6 of which were resolved with no remedial action being taken, and 2 which had some discussions with the officers involved. We are very fortunate in the fact, quite frankly, that we don't have numerous complaints. Obviously, we are not at the same level as some large cities where it is not uncommon for them to have something in the neighborhood of 1,200 complaints a year. When we last attended the conference of civilian police oversight folks, some of their responsibilities and things that were going on were absolutely astounding to us, and we, I think, can safely say that we are the smallest community, at least certainly the one that was in attendance, of any community in the nation that's active in this organization. Grace and Todd and I attended the last conference, and as a matter of fact, there's another one coming up, primarily to make sure that we are right where we think we need to be and moving in the direction that we need to be. The range of how people do things is as broad as there are communities, and I think people need to realize that. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong way to do this. There's a way that your community wants to do it, and I think that's, obviously that's a call for the policymakers such as yourself to say, here's how we want to do it in our community. Thus far, I guess, I think that that's worked out pretty well. The other thing that I would like to at least bring to your attention is the going back to January of 2008. It's on page 1 of 1 in the second group. I think it's the training outline. And just to let you see the kinds of things that the group of us have gone through in order to have a general understanding not only of, excuse me, what our responsibilities are, what the police officer's responsibility is, what the chief's responsibility is, and also the legal ramifications of the kinds of things that we're doing. I think that that's time that was well spent. If I were to say one area that I think where we move from here, it would be that our outreach efforts, we think that we have, as I said, the mechanisms in place that are necessary to do the job that we have been appointed to do. Now we need to let folks know that we're out there and ready to do those kinds of things. I want to quickly mention that we don't feel that it's our responsibility to try to drum up business for the Police Review Board. And there's really two conflicting points. As we well know, we have members of our community who feel this board ought not exist, and we have members of our community who feel that the board, no matter what they do, will not be doing enough. Our responsibility is to deal with complaints as they are filed with the city, and I think that we are prepared to do that in a very fair and equitable manner and to fulfill our responsibilities according to the ordinance as it was enacted by you. With that, I'll turn it over to my Vice Chair, Grace Mitchell, for her comments.
Good evening. I think a couple of things. It's been an interesting experience. Once we got off of the ground and got into our training, I think a lot of the things that we've put together has been ongoing. Lately, we've been working, as Tom said, with dealing with outreach in the community. At this point, we have worked on setting up some appointments, setting up some meetings with community groups. We had a special meeting with public input, and we got some of the concerns from the different programs or agencies or individuals in the community who felt that we weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing as a board. In our meetings, we did address some of these concerns, and I think now that we are moving in that direction. The biggest concern was our efforts to work with the community or to let the community know that we are out there and that we definitely are out there to try to work with this community, support the community, and provide more cohesive relationships between the police department and Urbana. I think we're moving in the right direction. If you look through our report, you will see the nature of some of the complaints that we have gotten already, how we have handled those. I was listening to some of the concerns that were raised in reference to the report, and I have noted those down, and these are something that I think for consistency's sake we will be addressing in our meetings. Also, the concern about the reporting schedule. I was not aware that it was conflicting information there, and that's something else that we need to look at, as far as the time frames and when the citizens can give their concerns, what the time frame is for them to go through the process and look at where we are with the city and should they be consistent. Question?
I would just add, in at least one instance in our procedures, we did give the city a bit more time for their investigation, and the reason for that is that it was brought to our attention that oftentimes it's difficult for the investigators to contact the complainant. That sometimes these are filed and they have a hard time tracking them down. You know, they may have moved, they may have changed addresses, those kinds of things. And but what we did as a safeguard is that if the time is extended, they do have to notify the board that they're asking for additional time. So that's one thing I would mention. One other thing before we open up to questions that I want to make sure that I mention this evening is, if there's one single thing that has been brought to my attention, I guess, and strikingly, in my discussions with other individuals that do this type of thing in other communities, is that invariably the reason that a board like this is set up is because some crisis took place in their community and they had to do it as a result of the crisis. And I think to that point, this council and this community is to be commended to be forward-looking and saying, we want to have something in place prior to the fact that some unfortunate incident takes place. We already have a mechanism in place. And I have some very close and personal experience with this. It took place in San Francisco, in Oakland. A murder took place, and their particular transit system is now doing what we're doing because their transit police were involved in an unfortunate situation. So I guess I certainly want to offer that both not only to the council but also to the community. As this is a very, I think, good move on our part in terms of setting this up before we have a problem versus waiting for one. With that, I think we'll open up for questions.
Questions? Dennis?
Well, it does seem like the Police Review Board has been well set up, and it seems like it's ready to run. And there is information about the cases that were filed. It says that 3 were filed by a single individual, and most of the allegations were about rude conduct on the part of the police officer. Disciplinary action was taken in 2 of these cases, but the rest didn't require that. And so I'm assuming that Chief Bealey talked to the officers and they handled that at the administrative level of the police department, which of course is an excellent thing to do if it was satisfactory to all the complaining parties, which apparently it was. So it seems like there's been a pretty efficient path of response to the community. We didn't have very many instances of filed complaints so far. And none really have come before your council. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I guess in a way, even though you're ready to do it, this is kind of a win situation. It's better not to have serious situations arise in the community that require the application of the Police Review Board. But if we need it, it's here.
Well, and our relationship with the department is also one that if we see trends, as we discussed we have reports from Chief Bealey. If we see trends that are going even in terms of no action taken, we want to see what's happening with these trends. Why are we seeing this? And I think that's one of the things that there's, so we have a set of citizens, another set of citizens' eyes that are saying, how are we doing?
From the events that have happened so far in these cases, even though they haven't come to you specifically, do you offer, maybe you're not even involved in these situations yet, but do you offer suggestions to the department on how to better educate the police officers as these cases have been processed in the department itself?
Well, I think it really depends on the individual board member. I personally will not look at the cases because I really don't want to know. I want to know the trends, but I don't want to know the individuals involved. So in the event that I'm in a position that I have to judge a case, I want to judge it based on what comes before me and the facts, as opposed to going in there and saying that person always has been doing this or that kind of thing. On the other hand, our board members have full access to all of the complaints and all the cases, and several of our board members do look at each and every one of those. And if those trends do come up, they're certainly capable of bringing that up when we have our meetings. Say this is something we need to do, and we'll be discussing that with the chief, deputy chief, or Lieutenant Cobb.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis?
Well, an excellent report, and I appreciate the information you've presented with your report. I had a couple questions with regard to the trends, and as you look over this, even though the Police Review Board has not really dealt with these cases, there's some obvious potential training issues that are presented here that come up. Obviously, the rude conduct. Is there any mechanisms that you can think of that would forward recommendations to the chief, for example, that they may need sensitivity training or some kind of further analysis on, to curb these kinds of behaviors? That would be a very positive step, I think. And also, as it relates to human relations, it would be to the city's advantage to make those, I don't think they're judgment calls per se, but the data speaks for itself. And I think that you need to somehow have a mechanism to make a recommendation, to the authorities involved and say, hey, we need to look at this area. There's too many activities, and this, it looks strange. What are you doing about it? That's what I think the public would want to know. And
Well, let me just respond very briefly. As someone who has the opportunity to deal with hundreds of people and their conduct on a routine basis,
I understand.
I can tell you that really two things, and I think we're there. That doesn't mean we can't do a better job. But I think the two things are we train our people to act in the way we want them to behave, and we make it very clear to them that when they don't act in the way we behave, we're going to take some corrective action.
Sure.
And I think that's a very good marriage when you have those two things. And I think that certainly if we think it's getting out of hand at any time, any of our board members individually or as collectively will be having those discussions. But certainly when it's, if someone is acting in a way that we don't think is appropriate, and then we sit there and go, we're not going to tolerate that, then that pretty much makes itself very clear within the organization very quickly that here's the line and you can't cross it. So we want to give them the tools in order to let them operate the way we think they ought to, and then we want to take corrective action when we need to.
Absolutely.
Sure, Grace?
Also, I think that.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Okay.
I got one other question.
Okay. In reference to that question, I do think that the relationship that we have with the police department, with the chief, there is an opening there that if indeed we see these trends, and we do see them, that we can sit down and talk about that with the police chief, as well as the other members of the board. Believe me, we have a strong board strong advocates for the rights of the citizens of Urbana. So with the trends that we're seeing, at some point we will be setting up that meeting so that we can talk about ways that we can work around them. Not telling him how to do his job, but suggesting possible ways that we can address those problems, trends.
The one other question I had, and I know that there's been public sentiment both ways, for it and against it. Are we addressing that concern with public input as we go down this path? As we've got ourselves in this position, now as we move forward, there's going to be a number of people that want to give their spiel on how it should be or shouldn't be or whatever. How are we, as we move forward, handling that part of our public?
Well, we certainly will take all the input that we can get from folks. That's the thing. We've had people indicate that we're just not getting all the information we ought to get, and I think no matter how hard we try, at some point, we're still not going to get all the information that folks think we ought to get. I think the single biggest proof in how we do is our commitment to being fair to both the public and their concerns and to the police officers and the job they're doing. I think that's, if we can create that balance, and I think we're doing our job. That doesn't preclude us from taking all the information that we can get and filtering it and saying, okay, what do we need to do? Are we sure we are where we need to be? And I think that's the best we can do right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mayor?
Well, I just have a comment, and I think this is a really well put together report when you even have a map that shows every single complaint.
Well, let's give credit to Todd Brent. Let's not give
Yes.
that, let's.
Todd, you did a great job.
The paid staff gets a little bit of credit for some of this stuff. The volunteers didn't do the map, I can tell you that.
Any other comments or questions? Brandon?
Yeah, I just have a brief comment to Todd, to Tom, and to Grace. My comment is that I really appreciate this. This is a great body of work, and I have been successful at getting the board off the formal process in place. My suggestion to you for this next year, you have talked about outreach, and in Todd's talked about, he talked about outreach. And I think outreach can be construed broadly in this next year, that at least for myself, council, I would appreciate if you took a broad view of what the city and the police department could do to better connect the police and the citizens and to strengthen that relationship. And I know we tried Thursday, a public meeting for the public learn about procedure, and we tried different things, varied success. But we still live in a community where some people think the police aren't treating populations fairly, and other people, like myself, I totally trust the police. We'll call them anytime there's a problem, but not everyone feels that way. And so it's our job, and I'd like your committee to help us, learning what other communities have done to bridge that gap and give us a picture of what programs we can create and how we can enact that sort of change to bridge the divide between the police and all things of our community, and to really build understanding there. So I don't know what other communities are doing to do that, and I would love from you those steps or those recommendations as you think the next year about outreach and about community relations.
I'm going to sorry, did you have more, Brandon?
Nope, thanks.
I'm going to repeat or summarize what Brandon was commenting on in case it didn't come across very well. Not due to Brandon's fault, but technological problems here. But basically, Brandon wanted the committee to comment on what he saw as a broad view of what we as a community could do to better connect the police and the community, to strengthen the relationship, to build trust and bridge the gap between the police and the community. And also, he's interested in what other communities are doing. There.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Did you want to comment on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Councilman Brandon, one of the things we'll be doing, this gave us an opportunity to kind of look at what other communities were doing when we went to the last conference. We'll be going to a conference in Austin,
The end of this month.
Texas, the end of this month. We brought back lots of material from the last conference on what the other communities and states and cities were doing. It's a lot. It's a lot of things that we can do, and we have learned from what we've seen that we would like to enact here with our own board. So we will be able to get back some more information as soon as we come back.
Thank you. Heather?
Brandon brought up First Thursdays, and that was something that the police department did on their own, was to have the First Thursdays. And I went to quite a few of those First Thursdays, and I was actually surprised at the lack of participants in that. The police department were the ones that were reaching out to the community, and the community was not reciprocating by coming to those First Thursday meetings, and they were not just in one place, they were held at different places throughout the city. So I believe the police department has strived to do a really good job and do a good job. I think that the community could do a little more to participate if, when those opportunities are available. And that hasn't been my experience when I've gone out to those meetings. And so, you know, there's a lot of people who say that the police aren't doing their job, but the police department were the ones who came up with that first Thursdays to begin with. So I'd like to see, you know, the people that have those complaints get more involved.
Trent or Todd?
Yes, I just wanted to make one comment as it looks like we may be wrapping up. First of all, just to address one of the concerns that was brought up, if you look on page 13 of the report, the language that you revised back in April actually gives 45 working days for the complainants to file. And I think that you, if I remember correctly, the discussion, the action was taken by this body in order to create symmetry between the requirements on the police department and the requirements for the complainants. It's on page 13. If you look under adoption of the revised ordinance, item 1, the very last sentence under item 1, the council also voted to amend section 1928G to require filing of the initial complaint within 45 working days as opposed to calendar days. So I think, if I remember correctly, you did that in order to help there to be symmetry. In regards to the reporting schedule, those reports are to be issued to the council, but it goes out with the council packet. It goes out as public information, so it will be for everyone who would like to see them. It will be published on the website along with all of the other council packet information. In terms of the appeals process, really the report tries its best to reflect the ordinance, and the way that the ordinance has it written, once the appeal has occurred, that the resulting process or the results of that appeal goes to the mayor for her consideration, and that's really where the ordinance leaves it. So I wanted to provide that, and I also wanted to take an opportunity to publicly thank the executive staff who helped me work on this report, and also the public works staff who put the map together that was mentioned earlier today. Thank you.
Thank you.
In closing, a real quick close, and that is, this Saturday we will be meeting with the Ministerial Alliance and discussing some of the issues that they may have, and I guess it's probably one of our I think our second major outreach effort. So
Great.
Just for your information.
Thank you. I'd like to thank your committee for the excellent framework that you've provided, which will be very useful in addressing problems when they arise. And also wanted to thank members of your committee, which include...
Thank you for doing that.
which includes Scott Dossett, James McNeely, Diane Gattiel, and Ivy Williams, in addition to Tom Costello, who's chairing it, and Grace Mitchell, who's vice chairing it. Thank you for your service. There are two members of the audience who wish to address the council on this issue. Normally, you'd speak beforehand, and I apologize for not having you come up, but on the other hand, you get to have the last word. So, Ricky Baldwin.
Thank you. I'm Ricky Baldwin. I live at 801 East California in Urbana. I did want to thank the members of the board also. I've been to a couple of their meetings, and I think there's some really thoughtful energy going into their deliberations, and the report, I think, reflects that too, as well as some work putting together maps. It's very nice looking, but it also, I think it's a good resource. I did want to address one issue, and I hadn't necessarily planned to speak when I first came, but then I started thinking about it. And I was glad to hear Mr. Costello mention the outreach, because that was my concern, actually. When we went through the, well, let me back up a little bit more. We had discussed the importance of outreach at length in the coalition that was advocating for this, and then in the mayor's task force, which I served on, I think we had envisioned, or I think at least some of us had envisioned a little more proactive board, not, as Mr. Costello says, to find complaints where they aren't, but to at least go out and beat the bushes a little and see what's there, at least to get the word out. I know that that takes time, and I understand the board didn't want to put out the word before they were ready, and there was a lot of training that they went through, and we gave them a lot of, ultimately the council gave them a lot of jobs to do at the front end, the training as well as preparing their procedures and things. So I understand that, and I think some of us waited, but we were a little surprised in the spring during the reauthorization process and those discussions that outreach at that time hadn't really happened, and that I understand they had been talking about it. That was my concern then, February or March, whenever I spoke to them about that, and then here when we talked about it at this council meeting. But you know, it remains my concern. At that time, I said that I had, which was true, I had intentionally not sought out what information was available about the Civilian Police Review Board to see what I would run across in the public places and the places that we expected people to go where they might find this information, and I hadn't found anything, and I went to the board meeting expecting them to tell me what they had done that I may have missed, and it was in process. And I understood at that time that there were some things that were just on the verge of coming out, being published. I still haven't seen anything, honestly. You know, we had talked about having information out at libraries and public places like that where people might encounter it. I haven't seen anything like that. I do speak to people about the review board every now and then, and people usually, the comment is usually, whatever happened about that? Did we get that? What happened? Now, it's been in the newspaper. Obviously, if people who were interested enough to watch the council meeting saw it discussed here, and the task force meetings were televised. The board meetings are open, but I think for most people, they just don't, that's not on their radar. They don't see those things necessarily. I know I don't see everything that's in the paper myself, and I'm very concerned that at this point, I don't think that we envisioned a few years ago when we talked about this initially with this body, I don't think that we envisioned that at this point we would still be talking about outreach as something that was in the preliminary phase. So I think the board has worked very hard, don't get me wrong. At those meetings, I think there's a lot of thoughtful energy and some people who are very concerned and dedicated. I heard a lot of comments that were that surprised me in a good way at that meeting, in those deliberations at the board. But I am concerned that at this point, I think the word isn't getting out to people that this is a right that they have to appeal if they do have a complaint. It might affect their ability to, or their willingness to complain. I don't know. It's difficult to speculate without that information. But that's my major concern at this point. I have concerns about the ordinance, which I've raised here, and will raise again when I guess in 2011 when it comes up again. But at this point, my major concern is just that. I don't think a lot of people actually know that the board is there and operating and ready, or even that it's a possibility. So.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Baldwin? Okay. Next, thank you. Next up is Brian Dolinar. And you have 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Brian Dolinar. I live at 303 West Locust in Urbana, and also looked at the annual report and been following for the last year or so the progress of the CPRB. One of my first concerns, as much I think the board's doing great work, and this is extremely important work of great concern to the community, police community relations, and I think shows a great willingness from the city and from the police chief to provide transparency to the public. But again, I wanted to restate my concern that the Police Review Board is only meeting quarterly now, especially due to the concerns stated by Ricky Baldwin, that there's a need for more movement on the outreach to the community. I think there's a greater need. Meeting more frequently than quarterly would clearly speed up the outreach. My concern is also that I understand there's only 7 of the 8 seated members of the committee that are currently participating, that there's been 1 member of the board who has resigned, and I think it's important that that seat be filled promptly. Also on the outreach tip, our group, Champaign-Urbana Citizens for Peace and Justice, we have a unity march this weekend on the 3rd from noon until about 1:30. It starts at the Champaign City Building to the courthouse, and we invite all members of the community, city council members, the members of the Police Review Board. This is the unity march, and so everybody is invited. But our group's Champaign-Urbana Citizens for Peace and Justice, who's been advocating for police transparency for several years now, has not been contacted to sit down and meet with the CPRB, and we hope to do that in the next year. My last concern is that the internal investigations done by the Urbana Police be made public, and looking through the 8 complaints and the 2 that were found to be legitimate, I think that it's important for the public to gain access to those records, and I will be filing a Freedom of Information request in the next week to get access to the public records of this public body, the Urbana Police Department. There was a decision in Sangamon County in the appeals court, a case in which the appeals court found that all internal police investigations are public. What I read from the court said, quote, what an officer does in his capacity as a deputy sheriff is not his private business. Whether he used excessive force or otherwise committed misconduct during an investigation or arrest is not his private business. Not every scrap of paper that enters a personnel file necessarily is personal information. The police are operating in the public good. It's important that the public have access to complaints and to how the complaints are resolved. And I'll be putting in a FOIA request soon, and I hope the information is forthcoming. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Dolinar? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is a presentation by Dennis Roberts on the Lincoln Elm Tree.
Well, I wish to address the rest of the council, as sparse as it may be, today to share some information that I recently had learned about and ascertained concerning the ongoing celebration of Abraham Lincoln. we know that the Lincoln Bicentennial has been happening, and there's a heightened interest in the Lincoln history at this time, and the Bicentennial Commission that was established has created a program of wayside markers for the various communities in the central Illinois area that have associations with Lincoln historically. Our community is very fortunate in having 2 such markers, and recently during my researches at the Public Library and the Champaign County Archives, I've come across another association with Abraham Lincoln in our community that could well be made into a public marker for the Looking for Lincoln program, so that when people who are tourists and visiting our community are curious about what has happened here in this town relating to Abraham Lincoln, since we all know that he was on the 8th Judicial Circuit as a lawyer, that we were able to actually share with them as many things as we know about the Lincoln history here. And of course, basically all of the physical objects that were related to Lincoln, the courthouse that was existent at the time that he served on the Judicial Circuit, and the Pennsylvania House, which was the hotel he stayed at, and some other kinds of structures don't exist today. They've all been removed over the period of time. And it's going to be true for this particular topic that I'm going to discuss with you today, but it survived a lot longer than some of them, and it's really not a building, but it's a tree, most interestingly. And so I'm going to share with you the information about the elm tree associated with Abraham Lincoln. Okay, let me see if I can get to this. Yes. Okay. I'm starting this display, this PowerPoint program with just a picture of Abraham Lincoln that was taken in Urbana. It's well known by Samuel Altshuler. And this slide just indicates that, yes, indeed, there is a Looking for Lincoln program that's been established by the state of Illinois. And the city has 2 sites, the Altshuler Photography Studio, which is near the downtown at UC Banks parking lot on Race Street. We have a marker there. And we have recently dedicated one at the opening of the Champaign County Courthouse, new clock tower, and the museum associated with Abraham Lincoln. So those are 2 actually very fine locations within our community. And the third one that we could establish, and there might be more, I'm sure people may want to put some information forward about other possible sites, is a speech that was made by Abraham Lincoln in Weber's Grove under a very famous elm tree. And the Public Archives have a picture of this elm tree, and it says, there's a photograph of this giant tree sitting on the other side of a fence near a house, and under the tree is inscribed the words, "Big elm tree east of the big 4 shops under which Abe Lincoln's made one of his famous speeches." So this is the only clue that we seem to have about this tree. And in talking with the archivist, they didn't really know what speech was given, and they weren't really quite sure where this tree was. So that's, I'm sure, this is the result of history. The people who knew this and took it for granted are no longer with us. And so one has to do some research. And it turned out that because this was a topic that interested me, I did some research on it. One of the first clues I had about this was a survey that was made in Urbana in 1961, and there is a book called 100 Homes of Urbana that's in the archives, and these are just photographs that were taken at the time and typed up in little mini histories about various homes, one of which happened to be, it was called 708 East Main Street. And there was information in this document that said that this was the site of the home of Nancy Weber Munhall. Now, and it mentions that there was a magnificent elm tree on that property or next to her home that was associated with Lincoln. Interestingly enough, I tried to locate the house exactly what that might have been the house that Miss Munhall lived in. It's rather hard because the houses on Elm Street have gone through so many different changes and conversions and additions. And also, the street houses lots were renumbered at one point. So that makes the effort twice as confusing. But interestingly enough, what we do know is that Nancy Weber married James Munhall, and she was a child of William T. Weber, the founder of Urbana. Her father came to Urbana and lived for about a year before he passed away, but she and her siblings, including Thompson Weber and George G. Weber, all survived and lived in our city and prospered. Now, George G. Weber built a home that replaced the Weber family home on the property that the Webers owned, and you know that they owned the property on the east side of Urbana. And historically, just we all know that between the Busey, Mr. Busey, Isaac Busey, and the Weber family, they donated the land that became the center of downtown when the city was first platted and Urbana was cited as a county seat. So that's their significance. So we're talking about the daughter of the founder of Urbana, and when she was married, the Weber family gave to her a piece of property on the north side of Main Street, as it is today. And this was subdivided, and when it was called, interestingly enough, the Nancy M. Munhall Elm Tree Edition. I thought that was really interesting, that it was actually named concerning the elm tree as well as the family name. Now, Nancy Weber died in 1904. She had a very long life. And when she died, her obituary appeared in the paper. And one of the things that was mentioned in the paper was, quote, "The old elm tree at her home, said to be the largest in the county, played a prominent role in her life, and she always lived in sight of it. She believed it must be hundreds of years old." And interestingly enough, this tree was said to be a meeting ground tree for the Indians and the Potawatomi Indian chiefs when they would come together for council. So this was a very significant tree. I don't have a slide of it, but an early, I think it was an early 1958 bird's eye view map of the city of Urbana on the very, very edge. I didn't make a slide of this, but I should. Shows a very large tree, significantly bigger than any other tree, on the street, on East Main Street, and it just squeezes into the edge of the map. And it's across the street from the home of the Weber family. Now, I don't really personally know exactly when this tree died, because the tree is not there today. But it died sometime between 1904 and 1909. And I know this because in 1909, some photographs were taken of some of the family of Mrs. A.L. Tummelson, her grandfather, her father, and her uncle standing in front of the tree. But now the tree is merely a stump. And the article in the newspaper, which was reprinted in the Urbana Courier in 1959, said that, quote, "It is a site of Lincoln's speeches. This tree stump was once the site of Lincoln's speeches when he was visiting Urbana." And so here's the article as it appeared Tuesday, the February 10th in 1959. This was in the paper. And you see here the picture is on the right-hand side. Mrs. Tummelson is shown at the bottom of the article. And there's another building that no longer exists, of course, because after all it's in Urbana. And it was torn down. But that's where Lincoln actually had slept at one time. So I'm going to also show you a close-up of that tree and the indication of, you can read the caption below it, and the three gentlemen who were Mrs. Tumbleson's relatives. And she said that as a child, her father used to be so proud and that they would walk past that tree, and he'd always tell her, "That's where President Lincoln gave his speech." All right, so now what speech are we talking about? If we're going to have a marker dedicated to Lincoln, we have to know, really what happened and when. Now, everybody knows that there was a Lincoln and Douglas debate. And so we say, well, it's probably that speech, because one of those speeches was very hot in the topic, and I'm sure he spoke about that topic in Urbana. And indeed, Lincoln did talk about his opposition to Senators Douglas's the Nebraska bill, Kansas-Nebraska Act. But that speech was delivered in the courthouse, and that's well marked. And there's actually a plaque in the courthouse that Judge Cunningham, who was an excellent historian of the area of our history in Urbana, dedicated because of that important connection. So it was not his speech that was given in 1854. So what speech was it? Well, it was documented that the speech had been given out of doors, i.e. under an elm tree. So we look around now to see other events where Lincoln spoke outdoors. And it is recorded that he spoke at the fairgrounds, the Champaign County Fairgrounds. At that time, the fairgrounds were basically right pretty much dead center on Lincoln Avenue, on North Lincoln Avenue. And they're not, which is not quite where they are today. And yes, he came to the fairgrounds, he gave a speech, and then they had a very nice feast. They had a picnic, and one of the interesting things about Lincoln that happened at that time was that he gave up his seat at the head table to a little old lady, and he proceeded to eat his turkey leg under a tree. However, it was not the elm tree we're looking for. It was a story that appeared in the News Gazette by journalist Guy Fraker, who is a Lincoln historian, that gave me the clue to what speech it might have been. And he talks about Lincoln, a rally that occurred in 1856 during the national election, and one of the candidates was John C. Fremont. And Lincoln came and spoke for Mr. Fremont, as did a very large group of early Republicans. And it is quoted that the size of the crowd, quote, forced the proceedings of the day to be held at Weber's Grove, east of Urbana. Well, okay, that's at that time in Urbana, the Weber family really wasn't subdividing their property. They were holding on to it because the Webers were farmers. And the subdivision on the east side of town happened very slowly compared to the west side of town where West Urbana is today. And so pretty much as soon as you got out of past Maple Street in Urbana, you were pretty much in the woods and in country. However, it was mentioned also in a chronology of Lincoln's life printed by William E. Barringer in his volume called Lincoln Day by Day, a chronology 1809 to 1865 on page 179, that on September 17th in Urbana, there was an all-day Fremont rally, and in the morning, crowds assembled in the Grove east of Urbana to hear speeches by Herndon, Lovejoy, Scott, and Norton. They received a very sumptuous repast provided by the ladies of Urbana. They reassembled, and from their different stands, Lincoln and Fithian spoke, and Wilson and Bross from another stand. So that's recorded in the day-by-day life of Lincoln. So by looking in the newspapers of that era to see if there was a report, which you would assume there would be, yes, indeed, we find one, and we find that J.O. Cunningham had recently arrived in Urbana. He knew Lincoln personally. He bought and operated the newspaper in town, and he was a Republican. And so at that time, journalism being what it was, it's part essay and part facts. And he wrote like a 2.5 column, and these are extremely long columns, they're about like 20 inches long, report about what happened during that day and pretty much what everybody said and what they wore and how they looked and where they came from. And it's a fascinating history of Urbana. And as a detail of that, I want to read one paragraph. It says, and this gives you an idea of what politics was like in this time period when Lincoln was active. Early in the morning, the people from every direction commenced flowing into town with banners, badges, mottos, and the loudest shrieks for freedom. Some came in processions with a delegation from their neighborhoods, and some came singly, while others came in wagons, carriages, on horseback, on mules, on foot, none forgetting that they were assembling as a free people for the purpose of securing the blessings of liberty to them and their posterity. after raising the flag of our union to the top of a pole that was erected 150 feet high, which had been previously raised, and giving hearty cheers for Fremont, the throng moved not to the courthouse, but to Weber's Grove, and that's actually italicized in the newspaper. The procession was headed by the Urbana and Reynolds brass bands, which during the day acquitted themselves with credit in discoursing music for the occasion. So this is pretty much absolute proof that they were in the Weber's Grove, and of course this is under this famous tree. A story that was very, very much similar was appeared in the Chicago Democrat Press on the September 22nd, which is the next time that they published. So the story about Lincoln's speech under this elm tree, which we have photographs of and we have personal recollections of, and we have the address of the location on Main Street where this occurred, because we know where Miss Munhall's home was situated, is part of the lore of Urbana. Newspaper articles, photographs, and personal reminiscences support the event. A city plat map names this as the Elm Street edition, and we have a photographic street survey. We have the obituary of Nancy Munhall Weber Munhall, actually, which indicates that this elm tree existed and where it was located. So my suggestion is that this be approved as an official site for Lincoln, as the Lincoln Elm Tree site, and that my request is that the Looking for Lincoln Wayside Marker Commission choose to erect a proper and appropriate marker at this location on Main Street. And I have a photograph now of what Main Street looks like today, and the approximate location is as closely as I can figure it to where this elm tree may have been. Whether the house in the photograph that I'm showing you was actually built at that time in that location, I'm not sure, because the Munhall property was larger than the currently divided today, and as we do know, the street numbers were changed in the 1920s. This location happens to be between the AutoZone store, which is at 608, and the house at 704 East Main Street. Now, the Lincoln Elm Tree site happens to be right across the street from the Weber homestead, where there is a second story about a tree that is of interest to Urbana. And this is the Lincoln pine tree. Now, this story would be potentially a secondary story on the marker, and you can tell I'm kind of interested in this whole process. Perhaps it won't interest you, but I find this fascinating. During a neighborhood walk at the historic East Urbana neighborhood picnic several years ago, a lady who lived on Elm Street was talking and telling the group about the Lincoln tree on the property of the Webers. And apparently the story was that when Lincoln was doing his business, he stopped at the Weber family's home, and it was wintertime, and when he was leaving his carriage, he was not really paying attention as he was leaving the yard, and he drove right over a small tree that was in their front yard, and he broke it. Well, you know, he felt pretty bad about that, and so in the spring, he made recompense for it by sending a small pine tree, or at least sending the money to buy a small pine tree to replace the tree that he had broken. And with it, he sent a note. And I was told that the tree was planted in their yard, and that the note had appeared framed in the front foyer of the Weber home for years. Now, the Weber family sold their home not quite sure when, but later in it might have been in the 70s, and it was owned by a few people, and then descendants, rather distant descendants of the Weber family from California came out to just look around, I believe, in Urbana and see what their roots were like. And they saw the house, it was for sale, and they decided to purchase it. And they did. They purchased it, and they refurbished it, and articles appeared in the paper at that time about how they had restored the home. Well, after a while, they also passed away, and the house was sold. the outbuildings were sold to some people on Elm Street, which is the people that told me about the story, because when they bought their house from the Weber estate, supposedly the letter was still hanging in the front parlor. Now, the house has changed hands several times. Nobody really knows where this letter is today. And so we don't know how to trace it. It just seems to have disappeared. So this can only remain a story. I tried to talk to the Weber family, and really none of them in town really know anything about that letter. Nonetheless, the tree was pointed out specifically, and actually the mayor was on an Arbor Day event in Victory Park, and we all walked over and looked at this tree. And since that time, this house has gone through another sale. The land was subdivided, and the original owners who owned the older home kept the property on the west side of the house and built a straw bale home, which is Urbana's first straw bale house. But the tree, in fairly good condition, still stands along the roadside and has a very distinctive, interesting markings up and down where the branches once came off of the pine tree. So that's the tree that we're looking at, and so my proposal is that not only do we establish a Looking for Lincoln marker, but that I suggest where the marker might be put, and there is a free area between the AutoZone store and the house, which would be a nice grassy area, which the city might choose to work in conjunction with the AutoZone store to plant a new healthy variety of elm tree as a memorial to this location. And it just happens that that site is virtually right across the street from the legendary Lincoln pine tree. So if we want to have another marker in our community that relates to Lincoln, we actually have documentation, and it's an interesting thing, and I don't think there's any other city in the United States that has it, can say that they've got this tree that Lincoln once spoke under. So that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mayor?
Well, I think it's kind of nice that in Tree City, USA, we have 2 trees that are associated with Lincoln. I think we could apply to the state agency that does the markers. And I wondered, have you talked with Carl Weber?
Yes.
Okay, and he has no way of finding that letter, because I know our arborist, Mike Brunk, looked in the recorder's office to see if there was some record of Lincoln buying that pine tree. But at least you have the story, so.
Yes, and I was told that if we have a well-documented story, which I think we do have in the elm tree, that the secondary story can be more hypothetical or, fable-like, perhaps. It could be a good yarn, if nothing else. And one of the nice things about these stories is they are local legend. I did present my slideshow to the Lincoln, the Champaign County Commission for the bicentennial, but so far they haven't taken any action, actually, that I've heard of. And when during the clock tower presentation, I personally met Hal Smith, and he's the director in the state for the Lincoln Historic District, and he was very interested in it, and he asked me to send my documentation to him. So I have. But again, so far no action has really been taken. He did say that although there may be opportunities to continue finding Lincoln sites for the next 15 years, actually, the funding round for making the markers was pretty much set, and we didn't find out about this in time to be part of that, because I just didn't know. And that if we were to pursue it, probably either the city would have to donate some money to set the marker up, or the community would have to find resources, and it would cost about $10,000. So that's the cost that we would maybe be liable for if we wanted to have yet another Lincoln site on the map in Urbana. But I think it's well worth it as an investment for tourism, and it would be part of the database for the Looking for Lincoln program. So I don't know if it's appropriate. If I would like to make a motion that the City Council support the concept of following through on this site to establish an official Looking for Lincoln marker on East Main Street.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those, any more discussion? Questions? All those in favor?
I would say aye.
All those opposed? Okay.
Well, thank you for your support, and at this point, it doesn't cost us any money, and we will, we'll come to that bridge later. There might be a great donation, or maybe the city could afford a Lincoln marker. I don't know. If the county's thinking about having a big bronze head, well, maybe we can have a small marker on East Main Street.
Small head.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dennis. I would like to also congratulate Dennis Roberts for the publication of his recent book. It's called Images of America, Urbana, and it's a photographic essay. He's co-author, and it's a photographic history of Urbana, and it has fabulous historical photographs of schools, businesses, residences, and institutions in Urbana. And on the cover is a stunning picture of the courthouse, which is particularly appropriate given our recent dedication. So congratulations.
Thank you so kindly. Of course, my co-author is Ilona Matkovsky.
Yes.
She's the brains about the history, and I'm the photography wrangler at the archive. And I would like to say that we also have a photograph of Roger Ebert in our book on the last page, and the home that we recently dedicated a marker to. We made sure that they we included that the information in this book because we think it's so important for the community. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yes, Heather.
Yeah, I was at Barnes & Noble yesterday, the day before, and I saw that under local interest, there's the customer service counter, and then right behind there is a local interest area, and it's like front and center. It's right there for the taking, and so
for the purchase.
For the purchase, not for the taking. But I thought that was interesting when I looked at it too. So.
Thank you so kindly.
Okay, we move on to ordinance number 2009-09-109, an ordinance to repeal and make void ordinance number 2008-09-093, an ordinance authorizing the sale of certain real estate to Ecological Construction Laboratory for affordable housing development, 901 North Division Avenue. And this is connected to the next item. Can we talk about this as a team? Omnibus? Okay. Ordinance number 2009-09-110, an ordinance authorizing the sale of certain real estate, 1302 West Dublin Street, to Ecological Construction Lab for affordable housing development, community development.
Good evening.
Hi.
The first ordinance is basically to obviously to repeal and make void the contract with Ecolab. During the process of preparing for construction, we actually discovered that the sewer line that had originally connected the property we believe it was connected to the Lakeside Terrace private sewer line, which has since been removed. And so there's no current sewer line. We worked with our public services or public works engineering staff to identify a project that will begin as soon as possible, as soon as the permit waivers and permit approval has taken place. But Brad Bennett estimates that the project wouldn't be completed until at the earliest spring 2010. And Ecolab would like to go ahead and start construction. They're ready to start construction on their next super energy efficient house. So to do this, it's connected. We worked with Ecolab to identify another site that the city owns, which is located at 1302 West Dublin. You may remember we acquired this last year. And they will have to make a couple small adjustments, minor adjustments to their floor plan, but it's a south-facing lot, and they think it's perfect for their next home. We have Keely Martin in the audience if you have any direct questions of Ecolab.
Any questions? Heather?
I'd move ordinance number 2009-09-109 and 110 in omnibus fashion to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second.
Any discussion?
I had one question.
Yes, Brandon.
I was wondering, the vote was 7-1 at the Community Development Commission, if we could get the sense of that before next week, so we understand what the thing is.
Did you get that?
Brandon, did you ask for minutes of the Community Development Commission?
Yes.
Yeah, we can get that to you before next week. The reason we didn't have it was such a quick turnaround. We had our commission meeting last Tuesday, and the packets were due on Wednesday, and we're in the process of working on our caper, so we had a lot of things going on. But we can get that to you by next week.
Thanks.
We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, this is going on to council with a recommendation for approval. Next on the agenda is resolution number 2009-09-029R, resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation, and this is related to Green Street. Bill, go ahead.
Gail's here to assist in these next few items. In case there's questions I can't address. The first item is funding we did receive from Senator Frerichs and Representative Jacobson. It's called Emergency Road Program money, the amount of $567,500. In order to accept this money, we need to do a local agency agreement with the state, Illinois Department of Transportation. And this money will be used for completion of the Green Street project, which is already in progress and moving along well. And this then will free up some motor fuel tax money to help us in our capital improvement plan for our next fiscal year. Be happy to answer any questions.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I don't have a question. Is it other questions? Okay, I'll make a motion that we accept that resolution and 2009-09-029R, approving and authorizing execution of agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation concerning Green Street, and forward that to council with approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. That is going to be forwarded to council. Next on the agenda, motion to permit replacement of brick streets with concrete or asphalt at certain locations, Park Street and Goodwin Avenue.
The city, as general practice through the years, has maintained in kind brick streets throughout the city, especially in residential neighborhood areas. There has been, in the past, some exceptions where a street was perhaps paved over. In our research, the most recent scenario was a brick street right here on Illinois Street east of Vine that was overlaid, and based on the amount of heavy truck traffic, especially with fire apparatuses running over it, that was the solution instead of rebuilding it in brick. Well, before you tonight is two examples of streets that are what I would call Park Street being in a hospital/hotel restaurant zone area, office building area, and it's in poor condition. We had several months ago to do an emergency repair of a failed portion of bricks and put a large concrete patch in. Through the years, the bricks have settled and become very uneven. The gutter edge is, the curb gutter edge is a little higher than the street, which causes some drainage-related problems. And we've also received complaints from particularly the hospital with visitors, staff, patients, with traversing across the unevenness of the brick street. Second location on Goodwin Avenue, north of King's School, King Park area, there's a few block stretch that also is in very rough condition. We hosted a public information meeting recently in June, and did have a few people in the community come to the meeting to voice their concerns or support for upgrading the brick streets in something other than bricks. We did not receive any negative reaction to those comments. In fact, the hospital and others were, supportive of something other than the brick street. So what we are seeking is a motion that would then direct staff, engineering staff, to go through the process this coming fall and winter in preparation and design and preparing plans for replacing these two street projects for construction in 2010. There is money set aside in the capital improvement plan and in the budget for the reconstruction of these streets, and we're here to answer any questions. Just as a point of information, in a few subsequent years in our capital improvement plan, we do have some residential brick streets that will be going through some fairly extensive rehabilitation in brick, preserving them in brick. So brick street restoration and reconstruction is a very expensive process, but we are honoring and respecting in many of our true residential areas keeping brick in kind. But we felt that these locations, Goodwin being a collector street and Park being by a hospital, that it was a little more appropriate to not maintain those in kind.
Questions? Mr. Lewis?
I did review this, and I was at some of the meetings too, and I would like to move the motion to the council for approval with one minor correction, if I may, and that would put the brick streets will be replaced with concrete and strike the or asphalt. It's inconsistent with the language of your write-up. So, if you agree with that,
Then I'll second that motion.
Any further questions, discussion?
Yeah.
Ms. Stevens?
Is the reason for the or asphalt because of expenditures? I mean, I know asphalt can be less expensive than concrete.
We evaluate both alternatives when we're looking at redesigning these streets, especially for the section of Park Street. If you remember correctly, Goodwin Avenue south of this stretch that we're talking about was replaced in concrete, and for that reason, that section would be consistent with the concrete section north and south. That would be concrete. Park Street, and with our analysis with Goodwin, we believe that it's going to be concrete is the most economical section. So we'll look at both of them in design. So it doesn't matter if it's or asphalt in there, but we do believe, based on our experience, that concrete's going to be the most cost-effective when you look at the life versus having to go back and resurface asphalt in a shorter amount of time.
Okay. Dennis?
Yeah. Well, I really do appreciate that you have met with the neighbors in this area and gotten some feedback, and they did indicate that they favor the removal of the brick on the Goodwin stretch. And based on Robert Lewis's support of it, I also can support this. Typically, I'd be very concerned about the loss of brick paving in our town because, yes, it's bumpy and it's kind of old-fashioned, but it is significant, and it does give strong historic character to the streets where it does still exist. And I know it's not so easy to fix, but we do realize also that those usually when there's a problem, it's a subsidence of the soil below it, and not the fact that the bricks are wearing out. Those bricks seem like they're made out of iron. They are so strong, and they're not cracking apart in weather. They've lasted a really long time here in this town, and it's part of our heritage. And I just really do appreciate, Bill, your department's willingness to keep some of it intact. So thank you very kindly. So I support this small change in the construction of the streets to meet the needs of the time and the use by the hospital too.
Brandon, do you have any questions or comments?
No, but
Okay. I did have one question. When you say replace the brick streets, do you take up the bricks and save them for use other places in town? So you're not just paving over the bricks?
Correct. They'll be physically removed and salvaged, and We'll keep some for ourselves, and there's a kind of a judgment call. We also work with PACA, and PACA, especially with brick sidewalk brick, they have cleaned and palletized and sold them too. So I can't tell you exactly what we're going to do here, but I believe there's some of these street bricks that we're going to hang on to for repairs at other places in town. But if we deem we have an excess, we have worked with PACA in those situations.
Okay. Dennis?
If indeed large sections of the street are being sort of conserved, really, if we're going to save these bricks, if we could hold on to them for a little while, they might end up being extremely useful in the design of the boneyard. And, we're not going to be able to replace them by firing up some new bricks or buying some new bricks. If we have these historic bricks and we could lay them in sections of the boneyard, that would be such an excellent use for them for the city, even though it might require us to store them for about 4 or 5 years. I would like the staff to consider that recycling of the bricks into something that's of great use to the city in the future, rather than to release them into the public and have them dispersed.
I think that's an excellent idea. We had a motion and a second. Did we vote on this one? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That motion carries. Next on the agenda is resolution number 2009-09-03R, a resolution for improvement by municipality under the Illinois Highway Code, Goodwin Avenue.
This is a resolution that would authorize the expenditure of motor fuel tax funds for the Goodwin Avenue project. The money is budgeted. The contract has been awarded. As most of you know, work has already begun on this project. We waited a little bit for this particular resolution and felt it's appropriate now to bring it forward. We're also trying to seek other funding for this project, but there are bills to be paid, and we need to move forward with those payments. What we included in here was kind of a breakdown of the $2.6 million project and where the money is all assigned and coming from, and just to go through that quickly because it's a little bit confusing to verbally list it here, but $900,000 is being received from the Illinois Department of Transportation, which is called a Highway Safety Improvement Program grant money. Then we're using $800,000 of motor vehicle parking system fund money, and the rationale there, of course, is we do have meters on this street. It's kind of almost like a linear parking lot, if you will, and that fund is helping out in the repaving of Goodwin Avenue here. The University of Illinois is contributing $400,000 towards this project. The University of Illinois is actually contributing another $400,000 toward this project, but it's coming via the stimulus money. And since stimulus money could not be directly routed to the Goodwin Avenue project because it was already awarded at the time the stimulus money was available, we creatively agreed that the stimulus money would be assigned to the Windsor Road project. The University of Illinois share would go to the Windsor Road project, and we in turn would pay their share for this project to save them that $400,000. It's kind of convoluted, but if you follow me, that's how they were able to see a savings. We, for your information, received $875,000 for our portion of the Windsor Road project in stimulus money. And then lastly, the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District is contributing $120,000, and this is for upgrading the bus stops. And there's six of them, 6 locations. They're contributing to help with this project. So that gives you a little background of where all this money, funding sources come from.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'll make a motion then.
Is there a second? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, to accept the resolution and pass it forward to City Council.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, this will be forwarded to council with a recommendation for approval. Next is ordinance number 2009-09-107, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for Public Works dump truck and salt spreader.
Thank you. First of all, I want to introduce, I think most of you know, but Rich Coyne is our operations manager, and Rich has been discussing with me the last several weeks, and we've talked to the mayor about an idea that he and his staff have come up with in order to improve our service delivery during the winter time of salt and brine applications to our streets, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And secondly, during the balance of the year, dump trucks are the workhorse of our operations fleet. Virtually everything we do has to do with hauling materials or hauling away materials, and what we have before you is the purchase. Let me back up. We have budgeted in this fiscal year the replacement of 6 dump trucks. We hold on to them every 10, 11, 12 years. We replace them, and these trucks are outfitted with snow plows and salting equipment and spreaders to do the snow removal work and salting that we do in the wintertime. And then that equipment is removed, obviously, and in the balance of the year it's used for hauling purposes. Well, Rich and his staff's idea is to look into one of the 6 vehicles being a larger dump load truck. It would have 50% larger capacity, from an 8 cubic yard to a 12 cubic yard capacity, which would help us in reducing number of trips for taking materials, for example, to the waste transfer station, or to pick up materials in Decatur, for example, cold patch material that's a specific material we purchase that's 45, 50 miles away. This would help in reducing those trip lengths if we had a larger capacity vehicle. Also, though, and probably even more importantly, is this type of a vehicle is a size that would support what's called, it's a proprietary name, it's called EPOC, salt spreading system. And it's a particular type of equipment that you can use brine, which is basically a salt water mixture, and the piece of equipment would apply this brine not only on one lane of traffic, but it has the capability in directing the nozzles and the spray bar to hit like 2 lanes at one time. Now, our other dump truck piece of equipment really just do 1 lane at a time. So we can kind of reduce our passes, especially down 4-lane or multi-lane roads, in half. But as the memo explaining this piece of equipment talks about, is brine has a better sticking or adhesive ability that once applied to the pavement, it will remain in place, and it can be applied as much as a day or 2 ahead of a known, highly probable snow event, which we do seem to get every year, 6, 7, 8 major snow events during the year, or even lesser events. Versus the salt, and I think you've probably all seen experience when we will pre-salt a roadway system. After a few hours, especially with heavy truck or car traffic use, many times that rock salt can literally fly off, to the curb line or even into the parkway versus staying right on the pavement. It still works well in trying to prevent that icing bonding to the pavement and get that melting action going ahead of time. But this is an even better process, as Rich has researched in talking to other communities and other agencies. Now, the equipment we're talking about is not cheap. To upgrade the truck alone is a $12,000 upcharge to go to a 50% higher capacity, which in and of itself is not too bad, but the EPOC system is $88,000. Now, we're told, and EPOC has been around for many years, that this actual device or this piece of equipment can last longer than actually the length of a truck. In some cases, we're told as many as 20 years, so it could almost last the life of 2 truck cycles, if you will. But still, it's that major investment of $88,000. So what we attempted to do is go through some known cost savings in hauling trips in a memo. It's somewhat lengthy and to follow, and we looked at different scenarios for costs of gasoline, whether it be $3 a gallon or $4 or $4.50. It just depends on. A year ago, we were in the $4 range. Right now, we're in the $2.30, $2.40, $2.50 range. So that fluctuates a little bit as to the efficiency of this piece of equipment. But also, moving to a salt brine, we would save money in salt acquisition. We already have our prices for this coming year at $67 or so, $66 a ton. So the price goes up every year, although we're happy it's not jumping quite as bad as it did last year from the mid to upper 40s to $65 a ton. But even so, there's a salt savings, and we feel that there's also some environmental benefits with the ability to use less salt and have that salt directed more for the pavement versus going into parkways or flowered or landscaped areas and that sort of thing throughout the city. If I left anything out, Rich?
I don't think so.
Rich has done a lot of work with this, but we'll stop at this point and ask questions. What we're looking for is a budget amendment. The money we're asking for is $100,000 that wasn't budgeted to come from fund balance, and this is money from the capital improvement replacement fund. So Rich or I will hopefully try to answer any questions.
Heather?
I don't have any questions. I'd like to move approval, and while I'm usually pretty conservative and don't like to spend a lot of money, I think that being a city that wants to be green and have sustainability, when we're looking at a product that can last possibly twice as long, maybe 3 times as long as something else, and we are looking at cost savings when it comes to salt and gas and all that, I think it makes sense in the long run. Right now, it's a lot of money, but I think in the long run that the cost benefit, I think if you did an analysis of it, would be beneficial to the city of Urbana. And so for that reason, I would send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
Second?
Okay.
Is that you?
You could do the second.
No, I can't do the second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Lewis. Sorry. That was a question.
I have a question.
Diane, go ahead.
Well, I think this is probably a good idea. Let me just ask a little bit about technical things about the equipment. Salt is the most corrosive product that we have on our roads as far as car metals go, and people in the northern states, which we're kind of part of that, experience rust out really fast. So I've got 2 questions about the salt spreader equipment. One is obviously it's going to require a lot of cleaning and maintenance so that the salt that's building up on the nozzles or whatever you have there is taken care of. So that's one aspect of it. And secondly, when you buy a couple tons of salt and you put it in your dump truck and you go down the road, that's direct, in and out. But if you have to be at the shop to mix brine, does that mean that we also are going to need to have a water storage tank built, and will there need to be a way that the truck comes under it and it fills a big tank, and somebody's going to have to be there to ration out, 25 parts of salt to 75 parts of water? So not only is it more expensive, but it requires more equipment, more personnel time to prepare this slurry. So I just wanted to ask, that is also kind of like a hidden cost within the purchase of this equipment. And while I understand it's more effective because it's wider, it does 2 lanes instead of 1, we'll probably save money on tires maybe, or some such. I just wanted to get full disclosure here. will there be some equipment required to be, or will we be needing to build a tank on a race platform or something to download the slurry into the trucks, or how are you going to do that? Is there a pump that we buy that comes with the equipment?
As you know, we share this salt dome with the county, and the county has a brine system that they put in place last season.
Oh, they have that
Yes,
already?
yes, they already have the brine system in place. And we will use our salt share of, to make brine. The system's there. The one thing that we might add to it, might not happen this year, but we might purchase an additional holding tank. Right now, they have a 5,000 gallon tank in place. It takes about an hour to make this brine. It takes about 1 ton of salt to make 2,500 gallon. So we're going to go with what they have in place right now with the trucks we have. Also going ahead and using brine this year as an additive to our salt to help reduce the usage. We don't know if we'll be able to get the equipment,
this year?
This year, ready to use for this winter. It's still out there yet. But that's what we plan on doing with that.
So let's just really stay buddies with the county then, huh? Okay.
Well, yeah.
We are though. Okay, thank you. That answers that question.
But I think there is a county highway employee or multiple employees that are involved with the mixture, if you will, to make the brine. And we have these cooperative understandings where, we may send a piece of equipment over to help buck salt in the dome and, spend some time that way. And, we kind of share the workload of what it takes to maintain and operate the salt dome at the county complex. So, but no, we don't anticipate a big expense or workload impact to the manufacturing of this brine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's been moved and seconded that we send this ordinance to council with a recommendation for approval. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Ordinance number 2009-09-108, amending Schedule J of Section 23-123 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets: Smith Road, Oglethorpe Avenue, Montgomery Street, and Abercorn Street.
Okay, at the September Traffic Commission meeting, residents had approached the commission members about a safety concern, and the locations on the map attached were identified for no parking. For reference, these streets on the west side, there is already no parking anytime the entire length. On the east side, cars can park, but it gets a little tough to see when vehicles pull out of alleys to make turns, right turn, left turn, at these locations when cars park very close to the alleys. So the recommendation is in the yellow lined areas to also post that no parking anytime. As you know, the alleys are the main access ways to residences, garages for deliveries, mail deliveries, trash pickup, that sort of thing. So they're a fairly well-used route. So these were the locations identified.
I've got a
Heather.
question.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The yellow marks look like they're on the streets and not the alleys, or are the alleys running east and west? Am I?
The alleys run east and west.
They're east and west?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I got it.
Heather.
I know that for two reasons. I drive there, and because it's part of my ward, so when I was doing campaigning, I saw that quite a bit. I would move approval. Send this to council with a recommendation for approval.
I'll second it.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next is item 14, ordinance number 2009-09-111, ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for the intervention water company rate increase. Mr. O'Neill. Mr. That's you.
Okay. I thought that Ron Eldridge was going to be here, but so I'm not really prepared to discuss the issue. Okay.
We have historically joined with the city of Champaign and others to oppose the rate increases. And the amount that we spend doing this, I think, generates very large savings for the citizens. So it's something well worth doing.
Any other discussion? Dennis?
We all hate to see our bills go up, and the water company, of course, does provide an important service. This community here has thought about, exploring. We've explored in the conversation, alternatives to service from the water company, and certainly community members would appreciate the city to step forward and make a case that the rates stay the same or not go up very much. And so I think that we do great service to our constituents by following through on this for them, and so I support it. So I can make a motion out of that, and so I support it, and I move that this be forwarded to council with approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Roberts, seconded by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Last item on the agenda is resolution number 2009-09-031R, a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute an intergovernmental agreement for intervention before the Illinois Commerce Commission in Ameren electricity cases.
Now, this one I am prepared to talk
Okay.
about. This one is mine. Essentially, what this is going to be doing is an intergovernmental agreement. It will be Champaign-Urbana, and I believe Decatur, Bloomington, and Normal will be participating. And what it seeks to do is basically get an approval ahead of time that we are, in principle, going to be participating in these intervention cases before the Illinois Commerce Commission when Ameren seeks rate increases. We've had some success prior in previous interventions in rate cases. With the city's participation, the Illinois Commerce Commission has ordered Ameren to perform a detailed cost of service study and a detailed streetlight rate design study to determine their cost-based lighting fixture charges. And it's also ordered Ameren to move forward toward uniform fixture rates among the three Ameren Illinois utilities. It's Ameren IP, Ameren Silco, and Ameren SIPS. What this will do is sort of facilitate, this intergovernmental agreement will facilitate the cities participating in these intervention cases without us having to go through this long, arduous process. As you can see in the intergovernmental agreement, they will a review will be conducted each time these cases come up, and a report will be distributed to the cities, and at that time, the city can determine, each city can determine its participation or whether it wants to go forward with it or not. And it would authorize the mayor to act accordingly when the decision is made. The primary costs involved with these cases would be our legal counsel, which would be Richard Balow, Esquire, and also our expert witness, which would be our consultant, R.W. Beck. And I anticipate if you were to approve this now that there would be some need to come forward in the near future here with a budget amendment for our pro rata share of participating in the Ameren intervention case. So most recently they've asked for like a 28% increase in rates. So this is the second time in as many years that they've sought a fairly substantial rate increase. Somewhat similar to the situation with Illinois American Water. They come often and they come strong. You know, they want pretty, I don't ever see, hey, we're seeking a 5%, rate increase. I think last year Ameren wanted a 40-something% rate increase, and this year it's going to be, right now, this case is 28-something, 28%. So, if there's any questions.
Mr. Lewis?
What's the approximate cost that we?
If, in this most recent case, if all the cities participate, that's Champaign, Bloomington, Normal, Urbana, and Decatur, our pro rata share would be $19,055.32.
Where'd you get the 32 cents from? No, I'm just kidding.
Just based on our population. They've calculated it down to the cent.
Well, I'll make a motion. Are there other, did you have a? Okay, I'm ready to make a motion that we approve this intervention. So Resolution 2009-09-031R. I suggest we forward this to council with approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Roberts, seconded by Mr. Lewis. All those in favor?
Yes, aye.
All those opposed? There are no more items on the agenda. We will stand adjourned.